All right, we're live. Thank you, everybody, for joining me tonight on the Phys Ed Summit 2016. We're going to be talking about podcasts today. So this is Physical Education and Health Podcast for Professional Development. As you guys might know and might imagine, I'm a big fan of podcasts. So I want to try to make this as interactive as possible. So if you are joining us and you are on the Tozzle, let me know where you're from, what's going on, and I'm going to try to go ahead and do both of these at the same time. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk a little bit about podcasts and how I create my podcast and what I do with my podcast. And then we're going to have some guests on the show. And what we're going to try to do is we're going to create this session into a podcast. So it'll actually be a live podcast on the Voxcast network. So we'll talk all about that in a little bit. So got a lot of responses here. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you. And I should say, if there's any problems with the Tozzle or freezing up, or for some reason we have any kind of technical problems with the Google Hangout, all you got to do is just stay on that Tozzle. And if you refresh the Tozzle, a lot of times it'll fix those errors. And if for some reason we get kicked out of the Google Hangout, which I don't think will happen, but if it does, then I will put a new link to a new Google Hangout on the Tozzle. So just stay put, and we'll let you know. How to get reconnected. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops. And we'll get started. Let me share my entire screen. Whoa. All right, let's try to fix that. Okay, let me know if you can see my screen, if you're on the Tozzle here. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and push play on this so I can see what's going on. Okay, looks like we got it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about PE podcasts for PD. So first, we're going to talk about what podcasts are. Well, let me first start with this opening page. So all of these are different podcasts that I listen to that have something to do with health and physical education. So I'll go down the list, and if you click on any of these icons, it'll take you to the iTunes podcast application, and you can listen to these podcasts on iTunes. So we got the physical movement, the fundamental movement, the Global Phys Ed Voxcast, that's the one that I produce with the help of my friends on Voxer. PE Geek, the PE Umbrella, Shape America podcast, Run Your Life podcast, the Aussie Phys Ed podcast, which I just found out about and it's really cool. And of course Blabbermouth, which is also part of the Voxcast network. So we actually take that audio and or take the video and make it into an audio podcast. So that's a lot of cool. That's really cool stuff from Justin Schleider. All right, so a little bit about me. So I am on the Spark I team. That's my little superhero guy. Just recently became a member of Physedagogy. I am very active in my state organization with Tayford. I'm on a couple committees, including the social media committee. I'm the past diversity chair and do a couple of other things with them. I manage a Twitter account and a couple other things. I also produce the Voxcast, the Global Phys Ed Voxcast podcast. So if you're a fan of podcasts, check that out. What we do is we have health and physical education teachers from around the world, and we talk anything about health and physical education. And my school is Harvard Elementary, so I thought I'd put the logo on there as well. And I'm from Houston, Texas, so I got a beautiful backdrop of Houston, Texas on this page too. So that's a little bit about me. So we're going to start from the beginning. What is a podcast? So a podcast is basically a digital audio file made available on the internet for download through a computer or any kind of mobile portable device. Typically, they're series, and new installments can be received by subscribing automatically to the RSS feed on the podcast. So how do you listen to podcasts? So if you click on any of these icons, and again, you can download or you can have access to the full presentation. If you scroll down the toggle, you'll have there's a link to the presentation. You can check it out. So any of these links will take you to either iTunes, Google Play, or I also host I post the newest podcast of the Global Phys Ed Voxcast on the Physiology website, which there are a lot of podcasts that do similar things. They'll have a website dedicated to the podcast. So if you click on iTunes, it'll take you to the feed for the Global Phys Ed Voxcast. If you have an iOS device, the iTunes app is already on the device, so you can simply click on the device, check out your interests, and then start listening right away. It's free, and it's a great way to get professional development or just information or just entertaining podcasts from all over. There's thousands and thousands of podcasts. It's great. Google Play, the Google Play Store, they just released their podcast app. Or I guess it's not an app. I guess it's not like a dedicated app. It's part of the Google Music, but they have a podcast link there, and so you can go there. If you have an Android device, you can listen to all your podcasts on there as well. And then again on websites, if you like a certain podcast, a lot of times they host their show notes on a website, and you can check those out. Scroll through the show notes and possibly read more about the podcast that you just listened to. And again, if you click on that Physiology logo, it'll take you to the Global Phys Ed Voxcast tab on physiology.com. So that's where we are hosting our podcast. So there's a number of other apps as well, third-party apps that people use, and things like Overcast, and there's a few other out there that you can actually download and listen to the same feed, but it's through a different app that might have different kind of features. So these are the basic ways that you would listen to a podcast. And again, there are a bunch of different apps out there that will allow you to do the same thing. And also, when you host a podcast, you'll usually do it on a network kind of like Podomatic. That's the one I use, or SoundCloud, and we'll get into those a little bit later. But that's where the podcast would basically, or the RSS feed would basically originate from, and then it would go to these other apps like iTunes and Google Play. So I want to give a quick breakdown, like a crash course on how to create a podcast. So really quickly, and obviously this would take a little messing around with, a little kind of tweaking this here or there. It's not going to be the same for everybody, but this is a quick crash course on how to create a podcast. So again, I'm a big fan of podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time, and I decided that we would make our own podcast. So in a conversation on Voxer, we thought it'd be a really cool platform to actually use to create a podcast. And what's great about podcasts is that you don't need any kind of special equipment. You don't need any kind of expensive equipment. You can start creating a podcast right away with a very minimal amount of equipment. So if you have a computer and you have a cell phone, you can create a podcast. So the way we created our podcast is, first we decided on a topic. So obviously we're physical education teachers. We wanted to create something that physical education teachers elsewhere and all around the world would enjoy listening to. And we had this great platform in Voxer that would record audio. And if you have an Android device, you can actually take that audio out and actually use it. So we decided that we would create a podcast doing that. So we created so we had the topic, health and physical education. And then we just came up with a name, a very simple name. We originally called the show Voxcast. So took a podcast and the Voxer app, and we put them together, came up with Voxcast. Recently, we changed the name just to kind of make it a little bit more broad. At the same time, narrow down our focus with physical education and health. So we call it the Global Phys Ed Voxcast. So if anybody is searching for health or physical education, that tag would come up. So the next step I think you should do is actually record the audio and edit the audio so that it sounds like something that you would like to listen to. So I think that's a big part of it in the sense of there are some podcasts that are out there that the audio isn't the best quality, and it kind of is hard to listen to. So it's hard to listen to the actual substance that's in the podcast if the audio doesn't sound so great. It's kind of hard to listen to. So you have to use an editing tool to kind of help with those things, increasing or lowering the volume and helping everything sound smooth. So what I do is I use Garageband. So on my Mac, I put the MP3s into Garageband, and I edit them together. And I try to make it sound as smooth as possible. So again, playing with the audio, playing with the sound levels and things like that. Another free program is Audacity. So if you are a PC user, you can download Audacity. Takes a little bit of messing around with to get used to and comfortable with that platform, but it is a free platform that you can definitely use for editing purposes. Okay, so then what you would do is you would export and save the audio. So in GarageBand, it's as easy as clicking a button and you export and save the audio. What I like to do is I like to minimize the audio to its smallest format, so that way you can save a little bit of space. And then you have to find a place to host the podcast. So I use Podomatic, but there's a lot of different hosting sites out there. And a lot of them usually start off with a free purchase, or not a free purchase, but a free kind of membership or subscription. And then there are paid versions after that. So when we started our Voxcast, we started off with a free the free platform. And then what happened was that so many people were listening to it, we ran out of bandwidth, so we had to upgrade. And now we have, I don't know, over 60 podcasts out there, and we're kind of running out of space, storage space. So now we have to look at other options as far as, increasing our storage space, which is a good problem to have. We have a lot of listeners, and we have a lot of podcasts that are out there as well. So that's again, a good problem to have. So finding a place to host your podcast is important. Let's see. And then what's really important also, iTunes is the number one place to put your podcast. So everybody really wants to have their podcast on iTunes. There's other options again that will broadcast the podcast, but really iTunes is the one that most people listen to. So most podcasts are actually on iTunes as well. So that's a really important part too. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to how to create or how to post your podcast on iTunes. But it's not really hard. It's as simple as getting your RSS feed, putting it into the iTunes store, and then every time you update a podcast, the iTunes feed will update as well. All right. So my idea for this session was to actually create a podcast. So what we're going to do is I'm going to invite a couple people on, and we're actually going to take that audio. I'm going to interview them. I'm going to ask them about how they use podcasts. We're going to take that audio and create a global phys ed Voxcast episode out of the audio. So our first guest is going to be Dave Kearney. So I'm going to invite him to our Google Hangout. Bear with me a second. I'm going to figure out exactly how this is going to work. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. There I am. All right, and I'm going to invite Dave Kearney. All right, so I'm hoping he gets this invitation. I'm hoping this all works out the way it should. I'm going to actually put his, I'm going to invite him through his Gmail as well. So just to make sure. 2019@gmail.com. Gmail.com. Okay, so I've invited Dave. And while we're waiting for Dave, I think I'm also, because I'm looking at the time and I'm already a little bit behind, so I apologize for that. So while we're inviting Dave, I think it'd be really cool also to invite another guest to the show. Let me see here. All right, so I'm also going to invite Andy Milne, and let's see. Andy. All right, got Andrew invited. All right, so when you guys get your invitation, just go ahead and log on. Oh, I see Dave. Hey, Dave.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Nice. It took a little bit to get in here, so I'm glad.
Okay, good. I'm glad it all worked out. So I also invited Andy, so I'm thinking we can have a two-way interview with you and Andy.
Yeah.
If Andy jumps on.
He's on British time, so.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with the interview with Dave Kearney. So Dave Kearney is a physical education teacher from Florida. And actually, Dave, would you mind just kind of introducing yourself a little bit and telling the people what you do?
Sure. Well, I'm in my car right now, so I don't know if you can see me very well. It's the only place I could find that was quiet. So, yes, I'm a physical education teacher. I teach kindergarten through 5th grade in Fort Myers, Florida. And yeah, loving podcasts. I wanted to get on here and talk to you about it. You and I talk a lot about it, right? So I figured that'd be great.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because of everybody I know, I think you are probably more addicted to podcasts than I am. And you might be the only person that listens to more podcasts than me.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'll take the compliment, I guess.
I think it's a good thing. Podcasts are awesome. And this is one of the beauties of podcasting. So technology has brought us to this place where you can be in your car in Florida and I can be in my home in Houston, and we can have this conversation, and I can easily record it and send it out to the world to hear, and everybody can hear my viewpoints on podcasts. Everybody can hear your viewpoints on podcasts. And all it is we're connected through the internet. I mean, that's to me, that's just amazing.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, so I wanted to ask you, how do you use podcasts in your class?
Well, it's funny because at first I didn't think I did, and I was talking to you earlier, and like, yeah, you do. Yeah. So for one thing, I've been interviewing my students. I used to interview them through video, and I have a few on my YouTube channel. But it's easier to do podcasting. I just have my microphone and my my iPad. Just hook it up, and I'm just asking students questions based on, usually it's during big events like our like field day or our sport ed unit, our final game, or our ed camp type things. But, I think it's easier. It's not as, worrisome with permission from, I have parents saying yes to it, but, when you put kids' videos out there and pictures out there, there's always some kind of, loopholes or things you have to go through, not loopholes, but you have to get a lot of permission. So podcast is a little easier, getting their voices, not using last names. And by the way, but during the sport ed unit, I actually had students, one of their jobs during the final game was to be podcasters. They podcasted live during our last final 2-ball game. So it was really interesting. It was great.
All right, that's awesome. Okay, it looks like we're having a little issue hearing. Somebody was saying that it's difficult to hear. So we'll try to fix that. So I apologize if it is difficult to hear. I can hear you fine. I can hear you clearly, but maybe
off my phone. Hold on. Oops. Oh no. All right. I don't know if that's any better. I just took the case off my phone and unplugged. I was charging it, so I don't know if that helped at all or not.
I mean, I can hear you fine. Hopefully everybody else can hear. So if you're on the toggle, let me know if you can hear Dave. And if not, I'm sorry. We'll try to fix that. But this is another part of the editing part of it. Even if the audio is low, when I go into the editing, and I'll show you that in a little bit, when I go into the editing, I can actually increase his volume so the podcast can sound a little bit more smooth. Okay, so what are some of the podcasts that you listen to?
Oh boy, I listen to a lot, so I'm gonna.
Okay, give me. Yeah, let me rephrase that question. Give me
Yes,
like
yes, yes.
the top. Let's say the top 5 podcasts
All
that
right.
you enjoy the
Oh
most,
man.
and then
All right.
give me like 2 or 3 that you use for professional development purposes.
Okay. Well, I love all the PE type podcasts. I'm gonna throw yours out up there at the top, of course. I forgot the name of it now. The Global Phys Ed Voxcast was just Voxcast, and absolutely love that, and I love being a part of it. I love being a kind of a guest panelist on it. My first ever podcast was the PE Geek, so I got to throw Jared Robinson some props there. So he got me hooked on some ones like the Tim Ferriss Show, School of Greatness, but also things like that aren't even PE related, like Serial and Undisclosed type thing. I'm not gonna tell you which one, but I'm listening to a fantasy football one because you and I have a draft coming up in a few days. So um, I'm not gonna tell you which one though, but I also with the PE. PE Umbrella. Ryan Ellis does a great job. Just little tidbits of information, games I've learned from him that I like to play that I just incorporated recently. Lots of Andy Vasili's new one, or well, his new podcast format, Run Your Life. Just amazing hearing different stories of people around the world. I can go on for a long time, but I'll leave with those for right now.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I love that you mentioned Serial because I think that's the one that really opened the eyes of a lot of people, a lot of casual like kind of podcast listeners to the potential of podcasts. I think that one just kind of blew up and everybody listened to Serial.
Yeah, season 1 was incredible. Season 2, not so great. But either way, Serial was I think the most downloaded ever. It was just amazing.
Yeah, season 2 left a little to be.
Yeah, they went off the format a little bit. So just
whatever. All right, so let's see. Okay, so I wanted to ask also, what influenced you to start using podcasts in your teaching, and how do you think podcasts have influenced your teaching?
Well, I think it stretched my thinking. I mean, first of all, I can listen to it when I'm driving to work. Well, I actually have a very short drive to work, but driving in the car, it's easier than just sitting down and watching a video. Maybe I just love the medium of podcasts. It was like nothing I've ever heard before, and I didn't think they could tell stories the way like Serial did, and it just kind of blew my mind, I guess. And I've learned so much from it. Different, like the Tim Ferriss Show, just different kind of like life hacks basically, and from the PE type podcasts, different ideas. I mean, obviously Jared has tons of technology ideas, and like I said, there's other podcasts out there, and including yours that just I've learned so much from different elements of things like solar taxonomy and TGFU and just all different people and guests on the show. I think everybody has something to offer, and it's helped my learning and just increase my teaching ability just by these little tiny bits of information from everybody.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I love the way that you can take a podcast, or you can take some information that you learned in the podcast. Doesn't necessarily have to be an educational podcast, and you can transfer it to the things that you do. So the things that you see in your kids, the things that you see in your school environment, you can learn something from the Tim Ferriss Show and then transfer it onto your school environment.
Yeah, exactly. And like I said, I don't know if I mentioned, but it also helps me get word out to my I have a Facebook page for my PE class, and so it gets I sent some of the links out to the parents so they can hear what's going on, just from the students, just what's going on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I don't do it daily, but they can hear what field day sounds like. They can hear what these big events sound like, jump for heart type things and things like that. So yeah, it's been amazing.
Yep, I completely agree. All right, so Dave, so we'll be looking for more of your Supersize PE podcast. That's going to be coming out. You're going to be coming out with some more of those, right?
Yeah, definitely. I have a few I gotta tinker with, but yeah, I'll get them out to you real soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we'll be talking on Voxer.
All right. Thanks, Jorge.
All right, you take it easy. All right, so there was Dave Kearney, and I'm going to invite a couple more people in here. If I could invite them, if I can figure this out, get this done correctly. I think I need to copy and paste the link to this Google Hangout into an email that I will send Andy and Colin. So just bear with me for just a second. I'm going to send these invitations real quick, and then we will hopefully have another interview. All right. Link. Oops. Okay, Colin, I've sent you your invitation, and I'm going to get Andy sent in a second as well. So Colin, whenever you're ready to jump in, go ahead and do so. And then Andy, I'm going to send yours in a second.
What's up, bud?
All right, Colin Brooks, how's it going?
We got one. Yeah, sorry, we're having some issue. I was trying to help in the background there with some link issues, but
Oh, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. Yeah, I was trying to look back and forth, and I was like, "This is not working."
So I think that Andy's email ends in .net. So I think that may have been the.
Oh, got it.
To that.
All right, so let's start this off. I'm going to ask you a quick question, and then I'm going to send Andy a invitation. Okay?
That sounds good, man.
All right, so let's start off with from the beginning. So you guys had the Physiology Podcast that you and Matthew started. So can you tell us a little bit about how that got started, why you decided to go with the medium of podcasting, and really what went into that whole decision?
Yeah, man. So it was actually full credit to Matt Pomeroy. He just approached the group, the Physiology group, a while ago and said, "Hey, we should do a podcast." And it was a lot of fun. It was great. And we started just interviewing teachers and, some things that we noticed on social media that were really fantastic ideas. And the idea just kind of grew from there. So, Matt and I kind of took the majority of the workload, but there was also people like Naomi Hartle and some, other people, Jonathan Jones and some other people that were involved in the podcast as it went along. And yeah, it was a nice intro to what it was like to podcast. We started using Google Hangout to record the podcast and stuff. And, as you know, Jorge, we benefit probably the most from anybody when you're the podcaster, because you get to talk to so many high caliber educators and learn from them. So that's what it was like getting started with the Physiology Podcast.
Yeah, I think you're so right on point with that, because I've learned so much by being part of this podcast and just interviewing people. And if you listen to my podcast, it's not me, saying a lot. I really don't say a lot. I'll speak for like 10 seconds, and then the guest just takes it away. And that's what I love about it. I've learned so much from podcasting that I would have never had access to these people otherwise.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. It's been awesome.
Andy. How's it going, Andy?
Hey, man. Thanks for inviting me in.
I finally got your email right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry about that. All right, so Andy, what about you? What got you started on podcasting? How did you start using podcasts in your classroom?
Okay, so using podcasts in the classroom, it was kind of forced upon me. I was working in a small Catholic school, and there was a lack of funds, lack of technology. So all I had was my cell phone on my Mac. So that forced me, in a Malcolm Gladwell kind of thing, that forced me to think a little bit more outside of the box on what could I do with my limited resources. And I realized just how easy, and as you've been telling everybody, just how easy it is to create podcasts. So I've been podcasting now since I moved to the States, so probably for the last 7 or 8 years. And if you want me to, do you want me to go on and talk about how I use it in the classroom?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so obviously with the move now in health education towards skills-based health, something like a podcast is a great way to allow students to show what they know. So I guess in the past we would have asked students to fill out some kind of written assignment. I'd look at it, they'd look at it, and then it would end up in the garbage. And yet now through podcasting, you can create something that has a life beyond the four walls of your classroom and will live on in eternity. It's an engaging way in which to assess students, and it's something that you know they're going to share with others as well. So what I'll tend to do is pose questions to students, perhaps in small groups, get them to write their answers that then become a script. You can then use that script to get the group to work together and create their own podcast recording. So what I'll tend to do, pose those questions, get the script created, ask the students to go find a place within the school that's quiet, and then either just speaking directly into their phone or using the generic headphones that come with your phone. That's a great way to capture the audio. I like to receive the audio and chop it up myself, and then that allows me to put together a very polished podcast that is like a summation of everything that we've studied for that particular unit. Now, the good thing about that is that then I can share it, so different groups can listen to different podcasts, and they can then give their feedback if they wish. But what I can then do is take the audio and then embed that into the iBooks that I write. I'm a real Apple fanboy, and I love to write ebooks, and that's how I push my content out to my kids in my health class. So what I can do is then take the best of the best, embed it into my ebook, and then when the students from the next semester come in, what they listen to is the best I've ever heard, but it's the only thing they've ever heard. So then they have to raise their game and try and match that quality of recording and that quality of content, and then try and make it even better. If it's better, I replace the old podcast and drop the new one in. And then another way in which you can use the podcast is to flip the learning. So if students in semester 1, they learn the content and they create that podcast, and you then let semester 2 kids listen to it in advance of the unit, then on day 1 they come in and they say, right, this is what I understand about the content, but these are the questions that I already have. I come to the class wanting to learn. So now you've got the opportunity for students to educate students, at which point for us as teachers we can kind of step back and just kind of watch that teaching continue.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I loved how you said, it's such an easy thing to do, like record your voice, and then you would get that and edit it in and make it into a polished podcast. I think that's great because the students can actually do it, and the students can share their voice with literally the world, because you're broadcasting it to anybody who has access to a podcast. So, Colin, I want to go back to... Oh, go ahead, Andy.
No, I was going to say, because you said the world, once a year, I think it's kind of September time, there is actually something called International Podcast Day. And for International Podcast Day, what I did is I put a script together posing health-specific questions to teenagers. It was like, what health concerns affect you and in your part of the world, and what solutions would you perhaps suggest? And I put a script together, and I've shared it on our Tozzle. It's in a Google form. And I shared that out to different members of my PLN around the globe, and they got their students to record their answers, ship them back to me, and I put this great podcast together that is available. The link's on the Tozzle, and it's out there on iTunes. And what that allowed my American kids to do is they're so used to hearing an American-centric view of health. They get the obesity message, they get the physical literacy message, but when you've got students from the Middle East, and you've got female students from the Middle East in the podcast saying, well, I can't exercise because I can't go to a gym because I need a male chaperone, or when I go to a gym, I have to go to a female-only gym, And the people in charge of the gym are more interested in what I'm wearing than how I'm exercising and the form in which I'm exercising. That's when my American kids' jaws drop, because now the global community has come together and shown my students that there is more to life than just the health of a typical kid from Illinois.
Yeah, I think that's really powerful. And I remember last year when you came out with that global podcast, that was amazing. It blew my mind. Like listening to the voices of those children in the Middle East, listening to the voices of the children all over the world, and having, similar yet different concerns that our own, children have in the United States. I thought that was extremely powerful and a great way to use podcasts to connect people that way. I thought that was awesome. So Colin, I wanted to go back with you. Could you tell us about your current project, the Shape America podcast that you and Matt Palmer do? I think it's an excellent podcast. Everybody should listen to it. Awesome way to get professional development at your own time. So could you tell us a little bit about how that got started?
Yeah. So thanks, man. So the Shape America podcast was kind of, again, Matt Pomeroy was chatting with me one day, and it was his original idea to say, hey, we should do this this podcast. What do you think? And so we approached Shape America with the idea of having a podcast through Shape America, and it's been a great partnership. It's been awesome, and like I said before, basically us being able to be in the room with so many quality physical education and health teachers has been amazing. So basically the way that it works is we have several different topics that we discuss during the course of the year, and what we do is we find experts within the field on those topics, and then we get them in a panel and discuss it, and then we usually put our podcast about 30 minutes in length, so every podcast series is about 2 episodes. And they come out basically twice a month, and it's been super awesome, and Shape America is really supportive, and just being able to be backed by them has allowed us to get into about 25,000 different people's ears, so that's been an amazing feat and just kind of blew us away and pretty humbling. So I think it speaks, and what everyone is doing in here in this room and others in our field, is it speaks so loudly of how thirsty people are for professional development, and how podcasts really just get rid of those barriers that we as professionals and young professionals are kind of experiencing, and then you can listen to it wherever, on your commute or within your car. It's been an amazing thing to be a part of, for sure.
Yeah, and what I've realized, being in the podcast game myself, is that there's so many people out there with so much amazing things to offer and so much amazing things to share that you would have never known otherwise. If maybe they're not connected on Twitter, maybe they're not connected in another realm of social media, but you get them talking and they have so much wisdom to share and so much to offer our profession. It's amazing. Have you guys noticed the same thing?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Andy.
No, I was going to say, you're right. I mean, people like Dean Dudley, and I know Dean's presenting or has presented earlier today, someone like Dean can't be restricted by 140 characters because that's just not how he converses. So to hear Dean in the, what's his one, the fundamental movement, that's awesome. And then, people like Joey and Andy Vasily, they have a certain Twitter kind of persona, but when you hear them engaged with each other, Nathan Horn, when they're on their podcast, you just hear a different side to them. So it allows you to get closer to them and understand how they work a little bit more, which you wouldn't necessarily get just from their tweets.
What do you think, Colin?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's really, these conversations, Twitter and social media is really a good connecting point, but it's definitely, podcast allows us to take those conversations to the next level and really kind of dive deep into the next level of, of professional development. So I've been amazed by the amount of professional development that I've received, and just listening to how many experts there are in our field, and just giving them a voice and giving them that platform to speak has been a really cool thing to be a part of.
Right, exactly. Okay, so last question for both of you guys, and Andy, I'm going to ask you first. What are some podcasts that you listen to, and that have kind of influenced your way of teaching and maybe even change the way you think about other things in life?
Now, you've mentioned a few earlier, so I don't want to kind of double up on those. And also, I've been involved in so many as well, so I don't want to feel like I have to suggest those. So I did make a list. I'm on a real social justice kick right now. Both Justin Schleider and myself did a session for Jared on social justice. So NPR put one out called Code Switch. Code Switch is a really engaging conversation about race inequity. And to go alongside Code Switch is one called Tapestry. So they're my two social justice podcasts. I'll post those in the TOS a little bit later on. When it comes to sport and politics and that nice blend, Edge of Sports with Dave Zirin is outstanding. He has some great guests. He probes real deep. His series of podcasts recently on Rio and the backstory and the politics of Rio was really good. When it comes to PE and health, I love everything that you do in the Global Phys Ed Boxcast. There's so much, and it's so varied as well. That's the best thing, that it lives on as like a legacy. There's so much go-to PD there. And I really like what the guys are doing with the fundamental movement as well, for that group of academics to find time to get together. And there's some real takeaways there that if you dare let them slip at school, you'll scramble people's brains with conversations about assessment and what is right and what is wrong and why do we do what we do and justify teaching PE. So that, I mean, that's got some dangerous bullets if you really want to, start some fires in your department. And then finally, kind of education aside, I really love Freakonomics. And then I guess it would be remiss of me as a Brit to not suggest something from the BBC. I love the BBC food program, a conversation about food and politics. It reminds me of home. And there's always a nugget or two that I can slip into my nutrition lessons as well.
What about you, Colin?
Awesome. My list won't be quite as big as that. I have to say that I'm really supportive of all the health and physical education podcasts out there. But I'm going to just focus on one that I spend a lot of time on listening, and it's not related to physical education, and it's the TED Radio Hour podcast. It's really one of those podcasts that I listen to just when I have free time, and it really makes me think deeply about the way that I teach, and to hear about different people and with different perspectives and in different professions and all the innovative and amazing things that they're doing. And it really gives me kind of an opportunity to see how I can relate that to my teaching practices, and it definitely gives me a lot of ideas. So that's definitely my fave, besides the health and the physical education ones that are out there.
Yep, I definitely love those suggestions. The TED Radio Hour is one of my favorites as well. I love it. There's so much great stuff about just TED Talks in general, and then they get those and categorize them and put them into one little podcast. I think it's awesome. All right, guys, so thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we will make this into a podcast itself, and it will be available on the Global Phys Ed Boxcast channel. So thank you guys for joining us, and you all have a great night.
Thanks for the invite, Jorge. Take care.
Thanks, Jorge.
All right, so next up, I just sent a invitation to Justin Schleider himself, the man behind the blabbermouth. So hopefully he'll come in a minute. I know he's always multitasking and has about 20 different things that he's doing at the same time. So in the meantime, while he is joining us, hopefully he'll join us soon. I did an interview with Andy Vasily last night. So he is right now in Saudi Arabia. So last night it was about 10:30 p.m. for me, and it was about 6 in the morning for him, 6:30 a.m. I think for him. And that's another great thing again about podcasts, about this technology that we have now, where we can bring people together, and they could be on the other side of the world at a different time zone, a completely different hour of the day, and you can do a quick interview, put it together in an audio format, and create a podcast that way. So what I'd like to do is, what I did was I had a Skype call with him, and then I extracted the audio, And so what I want to do is I want to show you a little bit of how I put my podcast together. And then if Justin pops in, then we'll go to Justin. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and let me pull up my Garageband. Create a new one. All right, let me share my screen here. Entire screen. Oop, got that going again. Okay, so I pulled up GarageBand. I'm going to create a new, an empty project. And what I do is I basically have some, let me create this real quick. So I basically have some pre-made intros and things like that already done. And so if you have listened to the Global Phys Ed Voxcast, you know that we use an intro in all of our episodes. And so what I do is I just drag it into my GarageBand, and that's how every one of our podcasts starts. And so we created this on the first, for our first episode, and I've just ran with it. I just kept going with it. So if you haven't listened to it, here's a quick sample of what our intro music sounds like. All right, so you might recognize some of those voices. Andy was in there, Justin was in there, Eric Myers doing the Arnold Schwarzenegger voice, and then Lynn Burrows was in there as well. So I started off with the intro, and then what I do is I have some audio files. So last night, like I said, I interviewed Andy Vasily, and I have his audio files right here. So I have part 1 of Andy Vasily, and I have part 2 of Andy Vasily. So what I do is I usually drag them into a separate field so I can kind of tinker with the audio. Now I noticed when I downloaded the audio that my voice was pretty loud and clear, but then when Andy was talking, it was kind of muffled or kind of a little bit lower, a little bit more muted. And so what I like to do is I like to kind of tinker with the audio file or the audio volume and kind of make it as loud as possible for the podcast. So sometimes I will take a section. So when Andy is talking, you'll notice it's a little bit muffled. So it's kind of hard to hear. So in GarageBand, there's a simple way to fix that. So if I go to mix, I can go to show. I can change the. Here a second. I can change the volumes of different sections. So I can put a dot on one section and then change the audio from that section that I have picked out. All right, so I'm actually going to create another section here, and I can raise it to its maximum level. So now when I listen back to it, I can hear myself, and hopefully Andy's voice is just a little bit louder. So it's still a little bit muffled, but the more you play around with it, the more you can kind of fix some of those audio problems. And then, of course, you can also cut certain sections. So if you have a long pause, if you have some things that you want to edit out, you can always minimize those mistakes or those problems, and then just kind of add that to it. Okay, so that's basically how I edit my audio, and then in the beginning and at the end, I'll add a few things. as far as what the episode is about and who our guest is about, or who our guest is and what they do and that kind of stuff. So I always like to give a quick intro of what they do, and then we go on from there and I go on with the interview. So that is some of the things that I do for podcasting, and some of the ways that I create my podcast. Now, once I've finished creating my podcast, I save the podcast as an MP3. And again, what you want to do is you want to minimize it to the smallest quality, or the smallest file type possible. So sometimes that minimizes the quality. So if it was like a music or some sort of a song that you created, you want to have the highest quality. But if this is just voices, then it's okay to kind of have a smaller quality, and it won't necessarily make it sound any worse. It's just a voice. And if you have a complicated, track going, a lot of different instruments and things like that, you want a high quality. So I try to reduce it to the smallest file I can, so then that way it'll save space on whatever host site that I put the podcast on. So once I save it, I input it into the host site, and then it'll automatically update, Podomatic and all the different, Google Play and Stitcher and iTunes and everything else. So that's basically what I do with podcasting. So I'm going to go back to the Tozzle, and if anybody has, and I'll stop sharing my screen here. So I'm going to go back to the Tozzle, and if anybody has any questions, we have about 5 minutes left in our session. If anybody has any questions, I can answer those. All right, so I realized that some of the audio was a little off, and I apologize for that. I think what happens sometimes is it just doesn't go through. If I'm playing an audio file, it won't go through the Google Hangout. So again, I apologize for that. So I will be extracting all of the audio from this Google Hangout, from the YouTube, and editing it and to create a podcast that'll be available on the Global Phys Ed Voxcast. And you'll get to hear Andy's full interview where he talks about how he uses podcasts and his show, the Run Your Life podcast, and also the Fundamental Movement, because he's a part of that as well. So got a question. Do you give the link to your students so that they can access podcasts as well? I'm an elementary school, so I don't give the link to my students, but I do share it on social media, and a lot of my parents follow me on social media, so they'll get a link to my podcast as well. And a lot of parents have actually commented since we've started school back up that they've listened to my podcast and they really enjoy it, and they kind of see the direction of physical education at my school and where it's going based on the interviews and the things that we've done on our podcast. So that's always interesting to have the parents be able to listen to the podcast and get kind of a glimpse of how I feel, my philosophy on physical education based on some of the guests that I've had on the show. So that's really cool. Dave's podcast name. So Dave, he did some guest podcasts on our show, so the Global Phys Ed Voxcast. He did I think two. I think he's done two now, and he has a couple more that he's going to release that we kind of featured on the Global Phys Ed Voxcast, and those were called Supersize Pe. He has these huge groups of students. He will have like 120 students at a time, and so we thought it'd be cool to give a perspective on large group activities and large group physical education classes. So Dave's podcast is called Supersize Pe, and hopefully at some point he will also kind of branch out and do a podcast on his own, where he can talk about large group classes and things like that. But for now, we're kind of teaming up, and we're kind of doing that together. And the Global Phys Ed Voxcast will feature hopefully a couple more of his podcasts pretty soon. All right. So it looks like all right, so it looks like we're coming up to the end of the hour. So I want to say thank you to everybody for tuning in. And thank you to everybody for being patient with some of those technical difficulties that we had and inviting people and all that kind of good stuff. So I appreciate everybody's patience, and I appreciate you tuning in to the Phys Ed Summit in general, and especially the session here about podcasts and PE. So I'd love for you to type in some of the podcasts that you listen to in the toggle if you're still around, so I can find some new podcasts and, you know, kind of diversify the podcasts that I listen to as well. I'd love to get suggestions and listen to those too. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and don't forget to go to physedagogy.com/PhysEd Summit and fill out that survey so we can get some information on the different sessions that you attended, so that we can you know, hopefully create a even better Phys Ed Summit the next time around. So all those suggestions, you know, we definitely read, and we take those into account. And that's also a good way to get your certificate for participation. So make sure you go to physedagogy.com/PhysEd Summit so you can fill out that survey. And thank you everybody for listening, and I hope you have a good day, a good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you.